Hi, welcome to the channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Today I'm going to talk about the controversial delivery of tanks by NATO members and what influence it will have basically on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. If you are interested, please watch the video further and hopefully you can make some sense and hopefully you can agree with me. As you probably know, Britain has decided to send about 14 Challenger tanks to Ukraine. And the Zelensky and the rest of NATO pressurized Germany to send some of the Leopard tanks to Ukraine. But basically, Germany refused and said it will only do it if the Americans did it, if the NATO partners did it. Now, naturally, that is America. And in response, America decided to send 31 Abrams tanks. But this is only a farce, actually. According to the statements made by the Americans, they're going to have to manufacture these 31 Abrams tanks, and they're not going to provide them out of storage or out of their own stock. So that means there's a huge lead time, and it may only take a year before these tanks are delivered. So I'm not totally sure why they have decided that, but I think it's more like to pressure Germany and to supply these Leopard tanks. And if the Germans are in agreement, then they will probably allow the other NATO countries like Poland to send their Leopard tanks as well. And in response, Poland has promised to send some of the Leopard tanks as well as a lot of the remaining upgraded T-72 tanks. And I think in total, you get different numbers, different sources, but I understand it's about a little bit more than 100 tanks that are going to be delivered to Ukraine. Now, this is very controversial in a sense that it is, in my opinion, a huge escalation of the conflict and NATO's involvement. And I've talked before about this whole matter, that this salami slice type of little bit by little bit supplying more and more advanced weapon systems to Ukraine, hoping that Russia will not react. Well, given the amount of what Germany is supplying and Britain is supplying, and maybe America, we will still see that, it's not a huge increase in weapon systems, so I don't think the Russians will consider it as a major threat or as a major escalation. But we never know how much patience the Russians still have left. But let's look at what the effects of the tanks will be. Now, everybody says, the Russian says, it won't have a huge impact on the outcome of the war. The pro-Russian punters say it's not going to have a big influence, and we talk about Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor and all these other guys. And in a certain sense, I have to agree with him. But as I've stated before, the matter of the Patriot missile system was not in order to provide proper air defense systems, but to provide an excuse or a convincing maneuver for the NATO members to send more advanced weapon systems. And that is what happened. And this is going to increase. And when I talked about the end game, this consistent increasing of weapon supplies to Ukraine is going to push the Russians over the red line. When? We don't know yet. But it's clear that NATO is getting bolder and bolder and bolder because you don't see the reaction on the Russian side. And they only still see the threats being made. But I believe it's a total misunderstanding and miscalculations, and they don't understand how the Russian way of thinking is. And unfortunately, this is why I predicted that the end game in this conflict will be Third World War. But not now. It takes a lot of time to prepare for war. If you look back at the first Iraq War, it took America 6 months to mobilize and to transport all of their equipment to the Middle East before they even started with their offensive. And that was only in Kuwait. The same happened with the Second Gulf War. It took them a long time. But already some of the weapon systems were there stationed, so it didn't take that long. So again, Rome wasn't built in one day, and this is going to take some time. And it's not going to happen this year. In any case. So why do the Russian punters say the tanks won't make a difference? Well, if you look at the traditional sense of the use of tanks, like in the Second World War, there were huge tank battles where tanks basically in formation crossed open space and did a frontal attack on the positions of the enemy. And then there were tanks versus tank battles and anti-tank guns versus tanks, etc., etc. And that is how the strategy and tactics were at that stage. However, with today's technology and change, yes, tanks are still in certain regiments or command battalions or companies or platoons or I don't know, but they are in certain formations. But we have now seen a lot of videos on Telegram, videos from soldiers, videos from UIVs, from the Russian side and from the Ukrainian side. And nowhere have we ever seen any huge frontal tank attack or formation. The maximum I saw was about 1 tank and 1 APC. And so these tanks are used a lot more individualized. Now, Brian Berletic had a big discussion with some other Russian common analysts, and they were talking about the battalion tactical group. And, well, I'm not going to discuss it in detail, but basically a battalion tactical group on the Russian side is mechanized infantry, tanks, anti-tanks, anti-air, multiple rocket launchers, artillery, all these groupings, all these, call it, companies of different things that are arranged under a single commander. Now, in the composition of this battalion tactical command can change as the conditions are required. So they can add more artillery or add more tanks or whatever they feel like it. Well, it was a huge discussion and so on, and, well, I'm not really interested in that type of military, but it was for me very logical. I mean, you have a single commander that controls a full... You have a single commander that controls a full variety of companies of different compositions. So it made for me typical logical. That is how I would arrange it in any case, and I'm not even a military man. But those things are arranged when you want to do a frontal attack or you want to attack, or typically like not a war of attrition. In a war of attrition like currently is happening or the Russians are doing, is they are positioning their different weapon systems at certain locations on the front, depending on what the enemy has and what objective they want to achieve, and how they're going to basically defeat the enemy. Now, if you look at Bakhmut and Soledar, well, you would position a lot of artillery pieces and have some mechanized and tank formations that would do attack, but you won't do a frontal attack with 20 tanks. You will push in 1 or 2 with the necessary support of infantry and other systems. And that is how the war is currently being conducted. So if you look at, say, 14 Challenger tanks, yes, that is a certain company size. And now, if you want to use them as a single company, then that's not worth, that's going to have no effect. But as I always stated, a tank is a tank, and a tank has a cannon, and it's mobile, and it has armor, and it has a certain function in order to support the infantry. So the Ukrainians can make good use of it. You can still look at also at the HIMARS. How many HIMARSs were delivered? Say 20 of them. Did they have an effect on the outcome of the war? No. Did they have an effect on the battlefield? Yes. They did strike their targets, some of them, even if it was the wrong targets, like civilian structures. But they did function, and the Russians battled to locate them and destroy them. But they were never in enough quantities to make a huge difference. But it harassed the Russians, and it made the Russians think twice before they reacted to anything. And that was the whole purpose. Well, in my opinion. So the delivery of the tanks are not there for Ukraine to start an offensive operation, but to do local type of battles and support them in their local skirmishes or battles or defense positions. Now also, the Ukrainians still have armor, their own armor. If they didn't have them, then the daily Russian report won't specify that they have destroyed so many tanks and so many APCs on a daily basis. But they still do. And the Ukrainians are still fighting back. And they have to have armor in order to fight back. And they have to have artillery to fight back. So this story from the pro-Russian side is a one-sided type of a narrative, also living in a bubble just like the West. Don't want to accept the reality on the ground. Russia is winning, Bob's your uncle. That's it. Well, the Russians are winning, but they're also losing men. And they're also losing equipment. Don't tell me that the Russians don't lose tanks or artillery pieces. There's enough video evidence of that, where the Ukrainians have destroyed. It's not a one-sided war. And I wish people would stop thinking that this is a one-sided war. In any case, so bringing us back to the tanks. So the tanks are a lot more advanced than what the Russians are. Well, that is what we are told. Does anybody know what an upgraded T-72 tank has? Does it have any optical sights? Does it have any other electronic equipment inside the tank? I'm quite confident they have. That is what means upgraded T-72 tanks. And what are the Western tanks? They are upgraded with electronics. And a lot of maybe mechanical, they wouldn't be that much different from older versions. The biggest upgrades usually come in the form of electronics and targeting systems and computers and etc., etc. And as I've mentioned many times before, if you look at one of the videos where they talked to a Ukrainian artillery pieces, and where he was asked, is it difficult to operate the Western weapons? And he said, no, it's easier because you just punch in the numbers and you press a button and there it fires. And that is how the tanks work. All right, so the complaint goes from Scott Ritter that he says, yes, you have to have a lot of training. It takes you 8 months to learn the basic of the tank. And then you first, then you still have to learn how to incorporate these tanks in an operational field together with other weapon systems and other companies and so on in a formation that will protect the tank and make it more effective. But again, what he forgets to say, or what he forgets to think about is that we don't have a tank battles. Tanks are not being used where they have to be integrated with other tank companies and other pieces of artillery and so on. They don't storm over open field. They are not used in the traditional way that he describes. So there is no need for the Ukrainian tank people to learn how to cooperate and work in a group of tanks, because it's not being used like that. It's like when you see the typical military exercises videos, it's like you see a lot of tanks running over open ground, being supported by APCs, being supported by artillery, being supported by infantry. Those things are not happening. But Scott Ritter refers to that. But that's not a requirement for the training. And what he also forgets is that number one is that the people, Ukrainians or soldiers, are sent to learn these tanks are already tank soldiers. They have already probably driven and have experience with tanks. So they don't need 8 months to train on an Abrams tank or on a Challenger or on a Leopard. What they should be more concerned about the maintenance, yes, that would be a problem. But the point here again is that training Ukrainians on using a tank is like driving a shift car or a manual car. Doesn't take you long to adjust, doesn't it? Here in South Africa, we drive on the right-hand side of the road. In Europe, you drive on the left-hand side. I've driven a car, I hired a car in Europe, I drove on the left-hand side. Yes, I made some mistakes, but it didn't take me long to adjust my view to drive on the left-hand side of the road. It didn't take me 8 months. It took me about 2 days. So all this story about training, no. Getting used to the tank, yeah, short time. Working tanks in formations as intended, no. So we have the Abrams tanks that has a crew of 4 instead of a crew of 3. Oh, that's going to be a problem for the Ukrainians. No, it's not. They still have a driver, nothing wrong with that. They still have a gunner, nothing wrong with that. They still have a commander of the tank, nothing wrong with that. So who's the extra person? The guy that loads the gun. Well, that can be any person. You don't need 8 months training to load a gun. So what's the problem? The biggest, most important one is the gunner and the commander. But the commander can be versatile. But it's only the gunner, basically, that has to learn all the electronics. That is how it is. So I'm not sure why there's big hoo-ha about battle groups, battalion tactical groups. Is that this big issue for the Russians? We are not at the war yet with NATO. Should they become a war with NATO, and we have huge amounts of equipment and manpower on the border, and we are talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on that contact line, and then we have to attack with tanks and so on. That's a totally different game. And then all these nicely graphical groupings can be employed, and that is when it is necessary. But not that currently. This is all nonsense. So why are everybody like going out hoo-ha about the tanks? Well, Peskov has said they will burn just like all other tanks will burn, but the Russian tanks will also burn. Because a tank is a tank. And who sees the enemy first, and who shoots first, and who shoots the most accurately? You know, I once read, going back to Brian Beletic, he said that anti-tank weapons, he said under training conditions, the success rate of the American soldier to hit his targets with an anti-tank weapon was about 19%. Well, that's very low. But that's actually common. Whether you're an American soldier or a Russian soldier or a Ukrainian soldier, the percentage doesn't vary that much. It's very, very low. If you look at normal rifle fire, AK-47 type of thing, then the probability that you will hit a target, even if you aim, is like 45%. Why? Because under fighting conditions, you are nervous, you don't have time, you want to shoot back. You don't really aim. Your breathing isn't correct. Even if you properly shot, only a sniper can basically achieve fairly accurate conditions under fire, enemy fire. So look at artillery pocket holes on the videos that you see. They are usually distributed. So what's the chances that you are going to be hit? Even if you are in trenches. Yes, sometimes you see these attacks and so on, and you see a hit that hits a trench and people die. Yes, you do that. But after how many artillery pieces? That's one time, sometimes you see these people, they just curl up and then they wait. Because either they are lucky or they are unlucky. And they are hit by a shell. And then they die. In any case, this is not going to stop you. You can see that the Ukrainian army wants, I think, 300 tanks, 500 APCs, and another 400 artillery pieces, something like that. Well, they want that weapon, but they're not going to get it but they want the weapon in order to be offensive operations. You need that if you want to attack the Russians. But if you want to defend your positions against the Russians, you don't really need that amount of equipment. It would be nice to have, and it will make life a lot easier. But there's also a lot of other stuff that goes with it, which means ammunition and logistics and repair system. And then one has to ask the question is, they say these Western tanks are so sensitive. They're also fragile, especially the Abrams tanks. Well, how many Abrams tanks does Americans have? They have thousands of these things. Then why are all these so sensitive that they are prone to break down? So what's the use of having such a tank? But these tanks were not, well, they broke down in Iraq and so on. They couldn't leave the road. They couldn't go into, I understand, soft sand because they were too heavy. They were built for European theaters of war. Well, Ukraine is a European theater of war. And they should be able to work in those conditions fairly well, because that is what they were supposed to be designed for. So I'm not totally sure where all those things come from. For me, it's a question of you take a position, and when you take that position, you defend the position in terms of your narrative. But does your position, is your position a valid argument or not? And I see too much bias on both sides of the fence. The Russian weapons are not the wonder weapons, as they always try to call the Western weapons. They are also destroyed. Yeah, so just for interstate, they talk about the penicillin. Penicillin is the anti-battery type of system. It doesn't work on the radar. It works on flashes and sound vibrations in the ground, etc., etc. It is a more passive system. Brilliant system, if it works. I'm not sure if it works properly, but if it works properly, then it's a brilliant system, which is fine. But the question again is, how old is the system? And you will find it's a very, very new system. And then you have to ask yourself, but how many of these units have been built? And I believe there's not enough built, like hundreds of them. Maybe 5 or 10 of them are in in a battle. And how are you going to distribute 10 penicillins, if there are 10, over 1,000 long combat line, contact line? You cannot. So you have to be selective on where you want to place these things. And again, this Sunday, Hamas attacked Indonesia city hospital and 14 people died. Still, Donetsk city is not protected. Still not a priority. And that makes me very confused. Surely the Russians could have put some priority on this and at least drove the enemy further away from the Donetsk city. But then we have Solidar and Bakhmut. And what do we hear about them? We hear them that it's the Wagner group. Having fighting there for 6-7 months now, they achieved victory in Solidar. So where are the Russians? My argument is, what are the Russians really doing? Well, I presume they are preparing. They have built some defenses. They are stabilized the line. They're bringing the logistics. Maybe they have an attack planned for the summer, and they're preparing for that, which, like I said, Rome wasn't built in one day. But really, not protecting Donetsk city, I don't understand. Concentrating your forces and your equipment and say, it can't be that difficult, because I didn't say in my other previous one. After the New Year's massacre, those soldiers died on New Year's Eve. Yes, I told you, they took revenge and bombarded the barracks and killed 600 Ukrainian soldiers. But what they also did is they destroyed 4 HIMARS launchers. So how is it possible that if they want to do it, they can locate these HIMARS? And they can locate where the barracks are? And they could kill these people? And why don't they do it under normal circumstances? You know, question is, what is wrong with the Russians? Why are they not at least focusing the equipment on Donetsk? You know, there's another saying, yeah, but the Russians don't want to do it because they don't want to, there's so many towns, and they don't want to destroy all the towns and stuff. Come on, go watch the videos. Every single town is a fortification in itself. It's a natural fortification. Buildings provide that. You want to take over a town or a city, you have to bombard it. How much you bombard it determines how much you destroy it. Now look at the videos. It's all being destroyed. So there's no excuse for this. But then, pro-Russian people, they also stick their heads under the sand. Don't want to see what's really there. So, I don't see a lot of complaints about the tanks. I don't see the problem with that. In any case, that's my story for today. If you agree and you haven't subscribed to the channel, press the bell button, get notified, tell your friends. Until next time, cheers.